Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, class. We're all in our places with bright smiling faces. Good morning to Contemporary Issues class, and we are pleased today to have Bridget Beatty with us to talk about the Wellbeing Initiative and teens. Every once a year or so, we like to go to this topic of teens and 20s and see what folks say about it so we can understand what's going on, because they're not exactly our generation for our class.
Mine either.
But we love to hear what's going on and share thoughts, and so this will be really fun today and hear what the church is doing with the new program. But before we do that, and before I introduce Bridget's usual announcements, Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen so we can keep the background noise down. And we are recording this for future playback, and hope you will ask Bridget questions too, and speak up too, so we can hear each other well. Let's project today. Other things in the news, we always take a minute or two and just talk about things in the news. Our speaker last week, Bob Marshall, who was running for the House District, won his seat. Yes.
Are we allowed to say that on Zoom when it's recorded?
Yeah, right. And yeah, the media story said it was a surprise that first-time Democrat candidate defeated his Republican incumbent, the Republican incumbent. So we'll try and have Bob back in some months and ask him what it was like to serve the first session, and so that will be interesting. Yeah.
But that was state, right?
Yes, he was for Colorado House.
That's okay. I
Represent
remember.
Highlands
I forgot.
Ranch.
See, I forgot from last week.
Just like Mark said.
Just
Yeah,
like
you're
the
right.
sermon said today.
Yeah.
What a wonderful sermon it was today,
Yeah.
too. Interesting in so many ways, but I can't remember what he said.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yes, magnanimous.
Or only
That's
10%
right.
is what you recall, right?
Yeah.
Right. He's always got such a good way of weaving
Just like
things
teaching.
together. Yeah, he's a good teacher. Right. Any other announcements?
Just a question, Steve.
Sure.
Will the sports and religion session next week be in this room?
That speaker, religious professor, is going to be in this room at 10:30, and he's going to be talking about faith in the White House.
Oh,
Yes, at 10:30, and then at 11:30, he's going to be speaking in Fellowship Hall about sports and faith. But he's going to be talking here about the faith of presidents, how it's changed, and the Catholicism of JFK and how that impacted politics, and so it should be very good.
Make sure you record it.
We
since
will.
We will be gone.
Okay, we will record. All righty. Well, we want to leave plenty of time today for Bridget to show us some slides about the program. And let me tell you that the Wellbeing Initiative is focused on the mental health and social connectedness of youngsters 14 to 26. And the group has a board of directors, and Bridget will explain the program, why the church is doing this new program, and what the challenges are for youth today. In her previous role, Bridget served as executive director of a statewide nonprofit that was working to improve access to health care for young people in low-income communities. And she's worked in K through 12 public education, in higher education, healthcare, and the nonprofit sector. She's a proud alumna of Gonzaga and holds a master's in public health from the University of Denver. She was born and raised in Denver. Her partner, Tim, is from Summit County, and their two kids are fourth generation Coloradans. They have a family cabin in Buena Vista, and they recently returned to Highlands Ranch after living in New Zealand. Where were you and what did you do in New Zealand? Tell us about that.
Yes, we went for a family adventure. So to expose our children to more than the little bubble that they live in here. So my husband is a nurse, And that was our ticket to immigration. New Zealand's actually a very difficult country to get a work visa, and you can't get a visitor visa, but you have to have a skill on their critical skills list. And thankfully, everyone needs a nurse. So, yeah, so that was how we got in. Yeah, we traveled a lot. The borders closed while we were there because it was during COVID,
How
so
long were you there?
2 years.
Wow,
Yeah, so our children went to school there, and
what a neat adventure.
yeah, it was fun.
Could you work?
I did, I took a sabbatical for the most part, but I worked on the New Zealand elections when I was there, so I managed a voting site. And I did some consulting with the organization that I left here when they hired their new executive director, so, yeah, tried other things, coached a sport I had never seen before called netball. Anyone seen netball?
What
It's
is
a
it?
British Commonwealth sport. I think it originated maybe like a form of basketball for women. Men play it now too, but there's no dribbling and
Oh.
there's no backboard. And they call it they call it a goal, not a basket. And you can only, depending on your position, there's 6 positions, you can only go in certain sections of the court. So I coached my daughter's little team and my son was my assistant coach. And so I learned to drive on the left side of the road. That was really good for my brain. So, yeah, we tried to grow in other ways.
Wow.
So which community did you actually live in?
Oh, sorry, we lived in Auckland, so we were on the North Island, yeah, and it was actually our last choice. We really were thinking of moving into a smaller type of a town. Those healthcare positions are more coveted by New Zealanders. So the first job offer that came in was Auckland, and we were like, oh, great, we'll go to the big city, but it's a fabulous city. We actually love it. It's not big in American terms for a city, and there's a lot to do there.
What
So,
years were those?
we were there 2019 through 2021.
Recent.
Yeah, so it just came back last summer, a year ago summer.
No Queensland earthquake in 2010.
No, we were not there, but we had some American friends who were there rebuilding it. So, yeah, yeah.
Very good, thank
Yeah.
you. Okay,
Yeah, you bet.
okay. Whenever you're ready, we've got a slideshow.
Awesome. Do you mind if we put it in the display mode just to maximize it?
Sure, let's see, how do
Or
we do this?
zoom this
Slideshow.
over a lot?
Slideshow.
And
And
then
then
from the
just-
beginning.
Getting-
Yeah.
Oh, do I have to tell you Zoom?
Yep. There you
Is
go.
it okay if you don't see
Sure.
your people? Okay,
Sure,
let me know,
that's okay.
let me know, but I think this will help you see some of it.
Zoomers, can you see these slides okay? Are we screen sharing? Thank you, Susan. Okay,
Excellent. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, do you want me to control it or what's easiest? Or just tell you in the clip?
You just
in
use
this, how do I go to next
You
slide?
can do the arrow or the mouse.
Or the page down.
Just hit the-
Yeah, we'll
Okay,
just do the arrow if that works for you.
okay, sure, got it.
How many of you were involved with the community assessment back in, so about 5 years ago, St. Andrew was doing strategic planning overall. And Rev Mark has been really interested in this area of community health and particularly how it impacts young people. There was a process, is this familiar to anybody? Is anyone involved? Okay, I was not around, so I don't have the details, you were, okay. This footprint is, considered kind of where we can have the greatest impact. It's basically where members and congregants draw from, and it's what the church and the conference use for planning purposes. From a health perspective, they looked at some of the public health data in the area, and I think what not a mystery, but what the paradox maybe was that, here in this affluent community, we don't have a lot of other health issues that other family or other communities face. Because of the access to resources, lots of open space for recreation, safe neighborhoods. We don't have food deserts. All of us have very easy access to healthy groceries. Despite all these kind of positive physical health indicators, there were some pretty poor signs in the mental health area. And the question was, what's going on? Some of the key informant interviews, so that's when you just kind of do these casual interviews with people who do work in the field. They talked to deputies, they talked to EMTs, so paramedics, people like that. They were seeing this prevalence of mental health crises. The deputies were saying we can't even do neighborhood watches anymore because neighbors don't know each other. EMTs were saying a lot of our calls are mental health crises, things like that. So that fed kind of the launch of the well-being initiative, that this was something that Revmark really wanted to do something about. So we can go to the next slide. I'll give you some data points that are very recent. So the Healthy Kids Colorado survey happens in the schools. It's for secondary, so it's middle schools and high schools, grades 6 through 12. This is a Centers for Disease Control and Prevention surveillance project that's been going on for decades. So this is a validated survey that happens in schools. What we find, and so this is Colorado percentages in the box, and then it kind of shows you below how we compare. So our footprint, if you remember back the last slide, the majority of it is Arapahoe and Douglas County. It does touch into Denver, it does touch into Jeffco, but the majority of that footprint falls in Douglas and Arapahoe County. So when we look at public health data, those are primarily the two counties that we're looking at.
Excuse me, can I just interrupt for a second? Steve, we're only seeing slide 1 on Zoom.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Let me try and adjust it here. Two, okay. There, seeing.
Does that look like a new
Different one?
slide?
There we
Oh,
go,
good.
okay.
Thank you for speaking up.
Good, Susan, okay.
Appreciate it. Okay. So in this first question, about 74% of youth have an adult to go to for help with a serious problem. So that's a lot of people, but it also means 1 in 4 kids does not have an adult to lean on. The next one to the right, about 65% of youth agree that they belong at their school. So this is only about 2 out of every 3 kids have a sense of belonging at school. Sense of belonging, which I'm going to go into, is one that we're really honing in on because it's really connected. It's back to this whole theme of social connectedness. But a lot of times when you see things like school shootings, these are individuals who do not have a strong sense of connection to their school community or to a network of peers or whatever. This one down lower left, about 40% of youth felt so sad or hopeless that they stopped doing usual activities. So this is the layperson definition of depression. So 40% of kids grades 6 through 12 have reported depression. And the last, I think they say 30 days. That's a lot of kids. I mean, if if that's 4 out of 10 and you have a class of 25 kids, you have 10 kids who are depressed at any point. Lower right, about 55% of youth could talk to a friend about feelings. Now that was Colorado level. Down below is the qualifier. I don't know the exact Douglas County number, but it was a little bit higher in Douglas County, which is great. But again, if you think back to your childhood and when you were in school and whether you had a friend to go to about intense feelings, I would hope it was more than 1 out of 2 of you. So this is self-reported. But this is a really valuable data source to those of us in public health. This is conducted every 2 years. So this is local data that we started looking into. Next slide. And now,
Uh-oh.
yeah, I hope I don't mess up.
No, it's not wanting to advance. Let's see.
Arrow didn't work.
I don't know how to make them both advance at the same time.
Yeah, let me just try something. I think I can figure it out. There we go.
You're seeing the next slide, Zoomers? Okay, excellent. I don't know how many of you are following that we have a new public health department in Douglas County. So for decades, we have been served by Tri-County Health, which was Arapahoe County, Douglas County, and Adams County. Due to a lot of interest in self-determination here in Douglas County, Douglas County has created its own public health department. As part of that process, you typically do a community health assessment. And so they conducted a survey of community members. N equals how many responses. So you had 4,600 responses to this community survey. What is circled is you'll notice that almost all of the items at the top, the question is, what are the 3 worst health problems in the community? Very top one is mental health problems, broadly speaking. The next one is vaccine preventable hospitalization, which is not interesting, or it's, to be expected because of when this was conducted in light of the pandemic. I don't think that would pop up in a different year. Social media was the third. Social isolation, closely behind that. Suicide, closely behind that. Overuse of technology, excessive screen time, bullying, risk of future pandemics, and substance or drug misuse. So all but 2 of those are basically under the mental health umbrella. So the good news, despite our partisan environment, not just in Douglas County, but everywhere, there is consensus that mental health is a serious issue that everybody wants to address in our community. So that's the good news. The next slide. This was a question about, do you agree, how much do you agree with this statement? Very much agree with it, kind of neutral, or disagree with it. The first thing says, there's an active sense of civic responsibility and engagement. You have, the red is the disagree. So you have slightly more on the left agree with that. You have 737 neutral, a little bit fewer disagree with that. But this is the one that I find really compelling. The second one, the question was, the level of mutual trust and respect is increasing among community members, and we participate in collaborative activities. This was the only item in the survey where you have more people disagree with that statement than agree with it. So when we're talking about things like social cohesion, social connectedness, everyone's feeling that, that we do not have a strong foundation of collaboration, or a spirit, I would say, of collaboration in our community. Next slide. So to go back to how this connects to St. Andrew, you'll remember that our vision statement is to eradicate social isolation and disconnection by practicing the faithful presence of the incarnate Christ. And so next slide, the well-being initiative is one of 3 strategic priorities toward that vision. So some of you I know are involved with these various bodies of work. Group life, this is group life. This contemporary issues is group life. So our faith formation efforts, things like that. The well-being initiative, which is specifically focused on young people and their social and emotional well-being. And then satellite communities is how do we better serve people outside of our walls and serve as their place of worship or their faith community. So for instance, growing to Windcrest and building a community at Windcrest in connection to St. Andrew, that's our satellite community. So just so you know where that falls.
That second one, are you soliciting any kind of participation from members to, I mean, is there some kind of community that's built around that?
For the well-being initiative? Yes, I will go into that.
Okay.
We do have a community board, but it's transit. There will be more opportunities moving forward because of where we are in the process. Yeah. Next slide. So the well-being community board. So one of the, one of the first things that, so I've been in this position since a year ago, September. And one of the first things we did was convene a well-being community board. And because this is outward facing, we're not just concerned about young people who are part of the St. Andrew community. We are really talking about a community health initiative, which means every young person who falls in the age group, regardless of their faith affiliation or any faith affiliation at all. So we wanted that to reflect on our well-being community board. So some of those members are St. Andrew congregants. 5 of them are young people, so they're representatives who fall in our age group. Others are content experts, so like work for the state behavioral healthcare organization, et cetera. So that group is the body that has been doing the strategic planning, and I'll tell you where they're headed next. And that roster is available on our webpage. I'm getting super academic, but since you all are a community of learners, this drives what we do in public health. The point is that there is no silver bullet for complex problems. If anyone ever indicates there is one simple solution, you should be leery. In the socio-ecological model, what we're recognizing is that you as an individual do have some choices, and that does impact your health. And things like genes, your genetic makeup, determine some things, but actually a very small percentage of your health outcomes are determined by your genes. Because you don't live in a vacuum, right? So the next layer of influence on you is the closest set of influences, your family or who lives in your household with you, and your peers. or clan, you know, we use all these terms because this is, you know, this applies to any international type of community. So how you are raised determines a lot about your outlook on life, what skills you gain, your attitude toward growth or problem solving, things like that. The next layer is community. And so Eric, who's a former teacher, and I were just talking about in our community, there are expectations, for example, to succeed. What we hear from a lot of young people is intense amounts of pressure to, you know, to not just go to college, but to go to the best college, you know, not to just play sports, but to start on the varsity team or take the lead role in the play or whatever. That's kind of community expectations. You might be getting it home from your parents and you might not. You don't always get that from your family, but it is a force in the community when that is a prevalent expectation. Society is, you know, let's go with like mental health stigma. That's way beyond your household. It's way beyond your community. There's a stigma around talking about mental health, acknowledging mental health challenges. How do we talk about it? That's way beyond any one of us. It's way beyond our country. It's, you know, kind of more of a global thing. So when we try to address a complex health issue, we have to look at what are the levers in all of these areas, and what do you want to do to impact each of those layers? And I'll give you some examples later of how we want to do that. One of the things that really impacted my graduate, when I was in graduate school, and I learned how little your genes, you know, kind of determine your outcome. It was really compelling to me how communities of color and low-income communities are impacted, like your zip code that you live in is a much greater determinant of your health outcomes than anything else, than your individual traits or anything else. And that's because of socioeconomics determine your access to resources or whether or not certain things are safe or available or reinforced or not. So it's important to look at the whole system. We're not just talking about individuals. Next slide. Do not be overwhelmed by this slide. I just want to point out that what we did as a community board was taking that model. We just brainstormed because the point of them is to come in with their personal experience and to talk about what do they see happening in our community, what impacts them. This was a brainstorm across all those areas, the individual level of relationships, which is your peers and family, the community level and the society level. And in public health, you know, you want to reduce risk factors. These things are what make it, you know, more likely to have a negative outcome, and increase protective factors. These are things that make it more likely to have a positive outcome. So for instance, faith or spirituality is a protective factor. We know that people who identify with faith or spirituality can fare better through adversity or tough times. However, we also know that certain organizations of faith have continually marginalized people or discriminated against people. And so it does depend on what the faith community is. So it can be a protective factor. It can also be a risk factor. People are feeling judged, excluded, not part of the community.
Your committee did that?
Yeah, we brainstormed
That's
it. Well,
amazing.
I have a PhD who put this slide together. For us, so yes, but this was from personal experiences.
This may be too much in the weeds, but I noticed some
Yeah.
of the dot points are bold and others are not.
Yes,
So-
great question. So the items that are in bold came up in more than one group. So we broke into subgroups
Oh.
and we were looking for themes. So the ones in bold were the ones that came up more than once.
Okay.
Yeah, which did help us, you know, eventually whittle down of all the things we could do, which really was anything. Although I will say the one stake we put in the ground, and this is from Rev Mark and way back, was we wanted to be as upstream as possible. So prevention. We said from the very beginning, we are most likely not going down the road of providing one-on-one therapy. We don't want to be trying to augment the mental health or the behavioral health care system. We want to prevent so many people from reaching crisis or needing acute levels of service.
This reminds me of right after Columbine, in the Columbine community, there were community groups that met at St. Philip's Lutheran
Okay.
near Columbine in order to try to evaluate why this happened. And it was something, I think it was out of Minneapolis. It was called 41 Developmental Assets. And it followed this kind of a format where, let's see if kids take a survey where they can be identified on this kind of a spectrum. But that, right after Columbine, they were
Yeah.
soul searching.
Yeah, and a similar research study happened after the shooting in Arapahoe as well, yeah, to see what's going on in our community. So yeah, next slide. This is just showing you the process there was a lot of logic and there was a lot of conversation that got us to where we are. Yeah, next one. Yep, thank you. We conducted our own survey. So we launched a survey for ages 14 through 26 in in that footprint that you saw, we mostly focused on the south suburbs. So Highlands Ranch, Lone Tree, Parker, Castle Pines, will go all the way to Castle Rock. There's a lot of mobility between Castle Rock and Highlands Ranch. So we included that in it. And we asked young people themselves, like, what are the sources of stress to you? On one of the sides that I don't include in here, it's kind of like, who is stressed? Is it your family? Is it your peers? Is it strangers? Is it bullies? This one is just more when you think about stress overall, like what are the contributors? And so the largest kind of fall in line with that expectations for the future. It's academic and it's thinking about the future.
Yeah.
So in our community, this contributes the largest amount of stress. Now, not to underplay, like bullying, less than 30% of respondents said that is a major source of stress. I don't want to underplay, for those who do get bullied, that is very significant. So that is also important, and what we will look at as we kind of roll out offerings for all young people in our area. We will also look at the disparate populations, so for instance, LGBTQ young people we know experience disproportionate levels of being bullied. They experience 40% more suicidality than non-LGBTQ young people. So we want to look at those disparities within our whole group of young people, but we also want to look at kind of what does nobody escape. Most people in our community are stressed out about. The money, we're not totally, we can't tease that one out so well, because you notice the age group, those 14 through 26. So some of these are living on their own and, have started jobs and careers. And so that's not as much like people worried where their next meal is coming from. That is true that some people in our community do, but it's more they're stressed out about their future. And school has gotten more rigorous, I would say. The expectations on young people now and teachers is different than it was in the past. So those are big sources of stress.
Testing thing.
Yeah,
CSAP back in 2000, 2001.
yeah,
Gotta test them.
gotta test them. So yeah, so we had over 150 respondents, but a pretty good cross section of those communities.
A question on that. I would guess that with COVID, some of those things might have changed, like I keep hearing that.
The survey was just in the last couple of months, so it's pretty recent. We do know that, every community has reported worse mental health since COVID. So that is documented. There was one survey here in Colorado. We have the Colorado Health Institute, and they do a household survey. They showed the average was about 30% of respondents said that their mental health fares worse now than it did pre-COVID. And they're reporting for young people as well. It's like you're reporting for your household or your individuals. Douglas County was slightly lower though in that impact than Denver and Colorado average. So a little bit of good news there. They're also, didn't impact everybody the same. Like when it comes to young people, there's some indication that girls fared worse than boys in the virtual school environment, which doesn't surprise me when I think about how girls need connection, like they're wired in a way that is in relation to community. And so when you take away that day-to-day interaction in person, I think they fared worse with the virtual.
I was thinking specifically about the academic challenges. They talk about people falling behind.
Yes, that's true. But I think what I think just having worked in schools, I think they're just talking about the rigor of schools. And even, can you go back a slide, Steve? I'm sorry. They're like extracurriculars includes sports, but when you look at each one of these individually, they're a lot more demanding than they ever were before. You know, like I have a high school athlete, my son is, and it's year round. It's, you know, there's no like one season and then you're off, and it's not like 1 hour after school, like they're getting home at 7 and they haven't even started their homework, they haven't had dinner yet. So you know, everything has gotten more demanding. I think, you know, sports have gotten more demanding, academics have gotten more demanding. And I think this generation is feeling that. Do you agree as a teacher or anyone who's been in school?
It was routine to see groups of boys and girls go to tournaments in Las Vegas or Phoenix or all over the country.
Yeah, they're traveling too. for
Yeah,
sports,
travel teams.
So yes, that is true that there are some lagging scores due to COVID, but I think they're more reflecting school expectations, you know, period. Yeah. Okay, again, don't be overwhelmed, but I did want to show you. We asked young people, again, this was kind of all the things we could do, what would make a difference? And this was the laundry list that we provided. The colors, so it was a 5-point scale, you know, the highest 5 was the most important and the lowest was 0. And so what we looked at, like less pressure to be successful, you can see almost every score. This is the only one that's not above 4, but all of those are well above 4, regardless of what the subgroup was. So we kind of looked at the aggregate number, that's this one. But then we said, well, how are groups being affected differently based on by gender identity or LGBTQ or age grouping? So there's a few things that impact all of those groups within the aggregate results. On the flip side, we looked at where are we not going to focus, like drug and alcohol education. You'll see that got the lowest scores across all of the groups. So, you know, either they feel like they have enough information about drugs and alcohol, or they're tired of talking about it, or they know darn well what they're doing when they partake, right? But in public health, we always say why, right? Like, so it's really not the drug or the alcohol use. I think we're more interested in why do young people make that choice? You know, there's a huge correlation with mental health, things like trauma, depression, anxiety, huge correlation with substance use. So we're not interested in just educating about drugs and alcohol. That's not what young people are interested in either. However, if we can address some of the underlying causes that young people make those choices, you might see a reduction in drug and alcohol use. So this just helped us point to, you know, of all the things we can do. And then we applied our own personal, you know, the board's reactions to some of it.
Was this the St. Andrew community survey 5 years ago?
Nope, this was only just conducted in the last few months outside of St. Andrew.
Okay.
So some St. Andrew young people are in this number, but it was outreach in the community. Yeah, we have partners, community partners help put it out. So I'll tell you where we landed, so you don't have to interpret all that. So you're actually the first audience to see this. So this is actually going back to our Wellbeing Community Board tomorrow. And this is what we're proposing for a vision and a mission statement. So young people have a sense of belonging, social connectedness, and emotional well-being is what we're proposing as the vision. And the mission, like where we will focus, we actually lowered the age group throughout that planning process, because a lot of us felt like if you don't have these skills and knowledge by high school, which is roughly about 14 cutoff, you're not equipped. And those transitions are really tough. Transitions to middle school, transitions to high school, transitions out of high school. Those are known, you know, triggers for people and tough times to navigate. So we're proposing the mission be prepare young people ages 11 through 26 with coping skills. That's one area we want to focus on to manage adversity and cultivate trusted adults to support them.
I like that.
So the trusted adults, the definition of that is, you know, non-judging, active listeners, help you navigate, you know, adults who are not trying to tell you how to think or how to behave, but are helping you develop skills to manage life without judgment, and to navigate resources. So those are the two things. Our caveat on the new age group is we don't feel like we have a really good grip on the 20s especially in this community. I think many are in college, so they spend some time here when they come home for the holidays. I don't sense a ton of 20-year-olds live here on their own or independently without their families, in our suburbs.
Right.
Different if we're talking about Denver.
So expensive.
Yeah, absolutely, and not cool.
Yeah.
Then there's that.
Yeah.
So we're kind of, we don't want to let go of that age group because, you know, I think the 20-somethings, and I think the conversation might head there, are also feeling really lost. We hear from a lot of people in their 20s. They're not sure if they're where they're supposed to be in life, and they feel alone as well. And there's just a lot of discomfort, and we don't want to let go of supporting that group. We're just not sure how to do a deep dive yet with that group. The pilgrimage that Rev Mark took, the El Camino to Spain, we will continue to do offerings like that. There were multiple young people in their 20s who participated in that, and I think it was life-changing for them. But as far as the well-being initiative, we're kind of tabling those in their 20s. We don't want to let go of it, but we're gonna come out of the gates targeting that kind of 11 to 18 or 11 to 20 age group.
Have you encountered the new trend with the people in their 20s that are homeless? Because I was sort of shocked. I was helping with a severe weather shelter when we had that first snowstorm. And I went to the South Church, and I opened the door, and it was like, maybe I'm in the wrong place. Because rather than the people that looked homeless to me, here were these young people that could have just been anybody that were homeless. They were sleeping in their cars or something, and so
Yeah.
they had taken advantage of the homeless or something.
Right. And that number is growing, even in Douglas County. It would be small compared to a lot of other communities, but it's growing even in Douglas County. There are a lot more nuances now in the homeless population. And one is that some of that is by choice. Like you said, some young people, it is the van life, like living out your van, traveling.
I don't know, it was just because they couldn't afford the rent in Littleton.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and if you don't have a network of support, where to go? Yeah, so as much as that falls in our age group, yeah, absolutely. But again, we're trying to get as upstream as possible. So when that's a result of disconnection or a lack of social cohesion or lack of social support, that's where we're trying to impact things. Like why are those things not in place for all of us? Yeah. So that's what we're pitching, and I think, is that the last slide? Oh, there's one more. So yeah, so the focus areas would be, trusted adults and coping skills. Cross-cutting, we're calling these, just acknowledging that young people in the survey particularly really wanted us to focus on healthy relationships. A little hard without teasing that out more of what they're like, if they're talking about romantic relationships or family relationships, or if the respondents really were all over the place, we're not totally sure. But that increasing a sense of belonging in community, there are a lot of factors that support all of these things, like communication skills and emotional regulation and things like that will help all of these. So as an example of what we could do, because I know that this can sound really abstract, but we haven't decided. So just to be clear, we don't know which activities we will do. But as an example for trusted adults, we have talked about doing a parents and trusted adult incubator that would be like a 10-month-long cohort. So you would apply to be part of the program. You would learn a lot of those things about raising, resilient adults. I almost said children, but I actually like adults better.
It's better.
Yeah, I like that better. And also like how to be an advocate in the community, an advocate for mental health, or a navigator of community resources. So that might be an idea there. An idea we have around improving coping skills is a potential partnership with the Kemp Center, which has typically focused on children in the child welfare system, but they have expanded their mentoring program. So this would be with the School of Medicine on the Anschutz campus. They have a mentoring program that is like highest level of evidence for effectiveness. that is a 30-week long program that you would match a mentor and a young person, but it would be a structured, like, and so there's two benefits to a mentor program. One is relational, and that's just a young person having you as a trusted adult. The other part is skill building. They call that technical mentoring. This one would be both. So on the technical side, it'd be multiple lessons on developing coping skills, emotional regulation, what is healthy communication? So like what is assertive versus aggressive, things like that. So that might be a mentoring program that we pilot in the spring. We have not made a decision as a board yet, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some activities that could advance these goals. So I think that is it. Yeah, so that's where we're at. The board will be deciding tomorrow, really, I think they're going to decide if they're comfortable with these buckets being the priority areas. And then you will see over the next few months, some kind of a launch from the Wellbeing Initiative. To be honest, one thing that we're exploring is whether or not it would be beneficial to be an independent 501c3 organization. That is something that has been in conversation since the inception of this, is can we serve people better as an independent organization? There are pros and cons to being associated with a faith-based organization. I think one of the biggest advantages to being independent would be the ability to partner with schools.
Yeah.
So if you launch a mentoring program, for instance, and the schools would be a natural referral source, right? Their counseling department or whatever. You can't do that as a single place of worship. The public schools, you know, for rightful reasons, have a separation there between working with single places of worship, you know, or single churches or synagogues. So that's one advantage. Raising funds is another reason. Some funding sources, faith-based organizations are not eligible for those grants. So those are the considerations we'll be going through in the next few months, is like, what are the pros and cons? And really RevMark supports whatever is the way to make the greatest impact. So that's where we are. Ready for questions? Yes.
I think the last bond issue that passed in Douglas County allocated more money for mental health. And they hired a couple more counselors. In Rock Canyon, we have 10 counselors.
Wow.
And 2 social workers and 1 staff psychologist.
Wow.
So we have, there's a suite of offices just to support kids. 13 people plus the 2 secretaries.
Are they huge?
15 people.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I think they're
All the
probably
time.
busy.
Good to know.
All the time.
Yeah.
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 Are they in all Douglas County?
Just a
schools
quick
or just
question.
Rock Canyon? Not just Rock Canyon, all Douglas County schools.
Well, I'm only speaking from my personal experience.
The ratios, you will have more in the higher grade levels, so, you
I'm
know,
thinking
you'll have,
about Thunder Ridge, because my
Yeah.
kids go to Thunder Ridge.
yep,
Yep.
they'll all have a school social worker, school psychologist, and a school counselor, and they might have multiples. The primary schools will have fewer or less FTE of those positions, because the challenges increase the older you get, but all schools will have access, and a school nurse.
And you
would have
were
access
in
to.
schools. So
Yeah.
you know that one of the ways that we've tried to address these needs she's talking about with these community meetings is they formed this idea about 20 years ago. They call it homeroom or seminar. There's a lot of different names for it. Thunder Ridge was one of the leaders in that movement of pulling kids out and putting them in place for 4 years with the same adult, same trusted adult. Unfortunately, over the last 22 years is in some cases, with some schools, it's sort of regressed or become another temporary holding pen for kids. And so instead of having 13 kids that you get to know well, you end up with 25 kids that you don't know well. And then administration comes in and often puts responsibilities on that teacher, that trusted adult. Okay, you need to do this. You need to have the kids vote for homecoming queen. You need to have, it becomes an administrative holding pin, so that admin comes in and tells you, you gotta do all these little things with these kids, and so you don't have the
Community
time.
building, yeah, they were designed originally for community building,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So that time would just be getting to know each other, building trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
I am so proud of, and I'm sure we all are, of what St. Andrews is doing and having this as an issue. As a former mental health professional in Arapahoe, Douglas County, this is so needed, so very needed. I know the dilemma you're talking about, to be an independent, freestanding, to what degree you integrate with other partners. But certainly, I'm gonna ask the question about partnership and the partners on your board. Arapahoe Douglas Mental Health Network, Highlands Behavioral Health, which is over here at Quebec and 470. Southeast Counseling down in Parker, all have adolescent treatment programs, as you
Yeah.
probably know,
Yeah.
and young adult programs. The degree by which your partnership, and we're in such a strategic location, our building, our facility, our philosophy as a church, the kinds of staff that we have, the congregation that we have. We're all thrilled. I don't overdo this, but what you're attempting to do, but this matter of partnership.
Yeah.
And I know the funding aspects and grants and the dilemmas you have here is non-for-profit and et cetera and so forth. But to what degree are you, not to reinvent the wheel
Yeah.
that other organizations are doing? This matter of communication is an imperative, as you well know, so that all the agencies who are trying to do good works in Douglas, Arapahoe County know what St. Andrews is doing, and that we're a beacon of light. Yes, we are a church, but we're a unique kind of church.
Yes.
What are the responses you're getting from these other partners here in Arapahoe, Douglas County?
Yeah, the good news is we already have an umbrella. It's called the Douglas County Mental Health Initiative.
Okay.
And so all of those agencies that you talked about, we are all part of that coalition, if you will. What I would argue is that where St. Andrew is, we are bringing the prevention to that table, because like all those agencies you mentioned,
Right.
they're providing treatment and
Right.
therapy and direct services. We are trying to fill a gap where there are not enough players in the space of how do you affect, culture and attitudes and behaviors and things like
So you're being
that.
more proactive, not reactive.
That's exactly it. So in the continuum, you need the whole thing from prevention to intervention. I would argue that the value we're bringing to that whole collective is more in the upstream space to hopefully reduce burden at all of those locations. Now, a really good development in Douglas County on the treatment side, there will be 2 new facilities, crisis stabilization units. One is specifically for adolescents that we built within the year with All Health Network, and the other one is an adult unit. We are able to do these things because of the federal recovery dollars for COVID, which was called ARPA, the Rescue and Protection Act. So it was federal dollars under the Biden administration to provide support and recovery to communities, and mental health was one of the eligible buckets for that funding. So Douglas County and All Health Network are pursuing some facilities. We, St. Andrew or the Wellbeing Initiative, will be applying for their bucket that is carved out for suicide prevention. So the good news is there is an infrastructure, there is already a body existing that ties us all together. It is just sometimes harder drilling in that prevention message. It's a lot easier for people to comprehend one-on-one therapy than it is this systems type work. Yeah, but does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
yeah. Yeah, and one thing that we brought to them, I would say, so in Douglas County, another exemplary model that our county has is called the CRTs, the Community Response Teams. That means if there's a house call and there's a crisis going on at someone's residence, this is a co-respondent situation where you have a mental health professional show up with a deputy. So instead of just a law enforcement response, you have a mental health professional. In most cases, you can de-escalate that situation so that it doesn't become dangerous for anybody, including the person in crisis. But we've heard directly from that team that a lot of when they go to calls, when it's young people, a lot of them are identifying as LGBTQ. So they are in crisis. Their families either don't support them or they don't know how to support them. And one thing that we have already referred to them is there's it's a therapeutic program called Affirm, and it's based on the cognitive behavioral therapy model. but it's a group program of 8 sessions where young people learn to kind of affirm themselves and come up with coping skills. But there's an accompaniment for the caregivers in their lives on how to be more affirming and supportive of them. So that is something we referred them to, that CRT team is trying to secure funding to do, so that their mental health professionals are trained in that. So we have already brought benefit to each other. We hope to get some of those county dollars for the wellbeing initiative under the suicide prevention. Yeah, I hope that answers it. Yeah, okay, good. One from the back, maybe.
So I guess I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I understand that a lot of it is sort of getting started and studying the problem. What might we be seeing in the future in terms of organization or what you're actually contributing to that?
Yeah.
Classes or
Yes,
one-on-one? Will you be asking the congregation to
Yes,
help?
yes.
also?
So in the two, so I think we can look at activities in depth, like when we talk about offering a mentoring program or a parent and trusted adult incubator, that will be taking a group and going really deep in skills, and then hopefully grow that group from year to year to year. Simultaneously, we would be offering programs like workshops that everyone would be invited to. So like when we brought Nick Thompson, did anyone come to our Nick Thompson series? He's become a really popular speaker in the schools, but he's a licensed clinical social worker, and the talk was raising resilient young people. And as we were talking about, a lot of it has to do with the parenting that is very common in our community, is hovering, right? Helicopter parents who are watching their children's every move, or the snowplow parent, which is trying to remove every obstacle out of the way for your child, you know, or calling the school and complaining that your child did not win the student council election, or that, can you find Johnny's socks? He left them in the locker room. These are serious, these are phone calls schools are getting because of a different generation of parenting.
Putting them in algebra when they didn't belong in algebra.
Right, because they think that somehow reflects them.
And then it's
They're better
semester,
at
then it's semester, they wanna go back. They wanna switch back to the regular math.
Yeah.
Because their kid's getting a D or an F.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think there are a lot of offerings that we can make that everyone would be invited to. Pie in the Sky might also be a podcast that would be available to everyone. Maybe you bring in speakers like Nick Thompson, you know, Rev Mark, behavioral health specialists. So to answer both, like, I think some will be activities that go really deep with a smaller group of people, like the mentees or the mentors. And then also have offerings that are open to the whole community in the form of a class or a workshop or a dialogue or whatever.
Have you
Does
heard,
that answer your question? Okay.
have you heard of sources of strength?
Yes.
That's probably, that started about 10 years ago in Douglas County. And
Yeah.
that's where kids get together and talk about some of these issues. And it is a little more proactive.
Yes. Yeah, Sources of Strength, for those who don't know, is a suicide prevention model. Schools are an ideal setting, but it's about how you build a culture around it. So it's not like a curriculum. We don't teach you lessons. It's a culture around how young people can identify what are their sources of strength. So it might be spirituality, it might be athletics, it might be family, but for them to give a lot of consideration to where will they turn when they face hard times, and how can they support others, and how can they recognize when others need support. So
Coping mechanism.
yeah, coping.
Is there any, I'm sorry, is there any consideration for helping teachers? Because I know my daughter is a substitute teacher, but the things that she faces in the classroom today are unbelievable. You know, I mean, she'll come home at night and it's some of the things that she tells us, and I know that's third grade.
Sassy
And-
kids that refuse to do what she says.
Yeah, or just belligerent right in the face, you know, and
High school?
she's grade school,
Elementary.
elementary.
Grade school, wow.
Yeah, and so I thought our church did an amazing job as schools started this year with,
Yeah.
well, honoring teachers and,
Yes.
Yes.
bringing a lot of praise to them. I thought that was really a neat thing, but I just think that there's that little element too that
Yeah.
needs to minister to teachers.
Yeah, I do wish we could do it all because, and that was sponsored by the Wellbeing Initiative. So that was the
Mhm.
Educator Appreciation
That was
Campaign. We
wonderful.
had yard signs to show moral support, and had a luncheon and a kind of a mindfulness related gift that went home with each of the educators. We've also done some mindfulness workshops for teachers. So, I think we probably won't have a separate stream of work for educators, but I think as much as we can support them in the trusted adult space, when there are, say they want to work on boundaries or
Right.
anything like that, I think some of the offerings in that might make sense. And then I think when we offer classes and workshops focused on things like mindfulness, they're the audience we would prioritize.
The statement that was put out, or was it on the website or something? But my daughter read that and she said, Mom, that is amazing that your church is doing that.
I wonder if it was Rev Mark's video remarks.
It was a written statement.
Oh, I wrote that. Yes, sorry, the love letter to
The love
educators.
letter to
Yes,
educators.
yes, we ran a full page ad in
Yes,
the Colorado
exactly,
Community Media
exactly.
showing our love for
Yeah,
educators.
yeah,
I'm
she
glad
printed
she
that off.
appreciated that.
She printed
I'm
that
really
off
glad
and
to
said
hear
it was
that.
amazing.
Great,
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I'm glad that had an effect.
Yeah, it was.
I'll get a copy for you. We've got just a couple minutes left. I want to take Mark and then ask Zoomers if they have anything as we wrap up here. Mark.
2 or 3 quick questions. I was pleasantly surprised to hear that you had 10 counselors in your school. Is that a high school?
Yes, it's the
So-
largest one.
Okay, so just so proportion wise, how many teachers do you have in that school?
Oh, I would say 150. Plus
So-
other staff would be 200.
So it's roughly maybe even 10% of the staff is the counselors, ballpark. I mean, you have 13 counselors and 150.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, yeah, teaching
Like how much of
staff.
that mental health support staff
So
make up
teachers
of the
probably
overall?
150, and then you add on to that the other support, because you've got paras and educational assistants, and one person will handle the kid in the wheelchair all day.
Yeah.
So it's probably closer to 200. So yeah, it's about between 5 and 8%, I suppose.
Okay, and then like 10 years ago, what would that number be? Do you
Oh,
think?
you'd have two.
Two.
You'd have one guy for the boys and one gal for the girls, and then give them the sex talk in 7th or 8th grade. And then after that, they'd help kids apply for college. Basically, that was their role.
Okay, and my last question real quick to our speaker, since you're doing prevention, how do you plan on measuring your success? By surveys or?
Great question. I think a variety of ways, to be honest. When we implement certain programs like that mentoring program, it's already an evidence-based program, so it should produce the outcomes of interest. That would be like a pre and post survey of participants on whether or not they gained knowledge and skills in coping, for instance. So some of the individual programs will probably have their own. We will definitely need to do qualitative evaluation, which is more, testimonials, asking people for their personal stories. So young people on, how they benefited from any of these offerings, or the adults in their lives noticing a difference in how their young people are from, an emotional perspective. So it will be a variety. It is hard to measure, anything at the community level, but there will be several different things that we would do.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Mark. Good questions. Susan and Ann, did you want to ask any question or comment? Okay, just wanted to give you the chance. We are out of time. Thank you, Bridget, for a wonderful presentation. Pray God, please bless Bridget's program and all that St. Andrews did.
And we'll be in touch. In the next few months, the launch will give us a better idea how you can all support it or plug in. So yeah, so thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, bye.
What's that?
Well, let me know if you want.
Yes, I appreciate